Shabbat Shalom once again. This time it's my honor and privilege to present to you our first speaker, the great Kahan, Nathaniel Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh, great family of Yahweh. You may be seated. The title of my sermonette today will be Remember Yahweh. And we have to keep in mind that Yahweh always remembers us. And in so many ways and so many different applications that Yahweh reminds us that He's here, that He recognizes us, that He recognizes the work of Yahweh, and that He's well pleased with the great and awesome witness in these last days. And so He inspired the great witness to allow for the feast to be a feast of purple. The great feast of Passover, we enjoyed the purple and the gold, and we rejoiced before Father Yahweh. And these are definitely things that Yahweh has said that we should remember. We have to remember what the purple is and what it's for. But, He goes a little bit further. And I just want to... This is when the priests keep Seder, they have name tags. Okay, they have name tags in their positions. And this, if you can see it, this is, it might be a little bit blurry, but this is one of the name tags. And you see that purple stone on there? Okay. All right. Purple stone. And remember, Yahweh does things in order to strengthen our belief in Him and to let us know that He's inspiring and guiding and directing this work. That the great witness is guiding and directing the people of Yahweh that they would enter into the kingdom of Yahweh, but we have to believe into the one sent. Okay, we have to, yes, if everybody would please give a round of applause for that, because the one sent is the only way that we're going to reach this particular kingdom. I mean, the positions that we have inside of the kingdom of Yahweh. Okay, now, I want to bring your attention to an article that was brought on the 24th of April. And I don't know if some of you might have already seen the article. But if you can see that, that's a purple crystal. Now these articles came out after the feast. Okay, so we rejoice before Father Yahweh, the great feast of Seder. We have purple and gold all throughout the whole sanctuary. And then Yahweh says, okay, let me even push this even further and bring out this particular purple crystal. Okay, this crystal is called the putnescite crystal. It says a new mineral named putnescite after the doctors who studied it. Putnescite occurs as isolated pseudo-cubic crystals. Okay, and the makeup, the crystalline makeup of it. Let's see. It says what defines a mineral is the chemistry. Its chemistry and its crystallography. Okay, that means the structure. Okay, the crystalline structure, and this crystalline structure is a perfect cube. Okay, it's a perfect cube. Okay, it says most minerals belong to a family or a small group of related minerals, but if they aren't related to the other minerals, they often are synthetic compounds. In other words, they're created by man-made elements in the earth. Okay, but putensite is a completely unique and unrelated mineral crystal, completely unique and unrelated to anything that they have found. Now, it's not a coincidence that that particular crystal should be purple, and it should be found right after We believed without seeing, and then Yahweh allowed us to see. Some further information about this crystal is that it was found in Australia, and it was found off of a lake, and the lake was called Lake Cowan. Okay, Lake Cowan. Now, the name Cowan is a rendition of the name Hakahan, or Hawkins. Cowan is a rendition of the name Hawkins. Okay, so Yahweh does these things in order for us to be strengthened and to believe into the one sent. Praise Yahweh. You know, when I saw the article, I was taken aback. It was just so amazing that it should come right after the feast. I mean, it could have been any color, but it was purple. Yahweh made it purple. Off of Lake Cowan, which is a rendition of the name Hawkins. So these things are done in order for us to always remember Yahweh, to always keep Yahweh in our minds. You know, when the requests came out for the fast, if we're able to, you know, we should join in on the fast for Yahweh's people, because there's a lot of afflictions, there's a lot of things that are going around, and these things are for the uplifting and for the building up of the house of Yahweh. They are. In our suffering, we are made strong. In our weakness, we are made firm. But we have to remember Yahweh at all times. You know, when we fall into various ailments or sicknesses, we might find ourselves forgetting Yahweh. Because by nature of an illness, and you know, it causes you to pay attention to your body. It causes you to look to yourself or be caught up in the cares of the flesh, because the sickness is affecting the flesh. But we have to be able to take these situations that we are in and see how best Yahweh is teaching us, or what Yahweh is teaching us. You know, always remember Yahweh in our minds. Always keep Yahweh in our minds, knowing that He has a plan. He has a plan for all of us. And this is what I just want to encourage everybody with today. Remember Yahweh and don't forget Yahweh. If you would, turn over to page 154. Page 154 in your books of Yahweh. That's Deuteronomy 8. Deuteronomy 8 and verse 11. It says, beware that you do not forget Yahweh in your afflictions, in your suffering, in your toothaches, your stomach aches, your headaches. Remember Yahweh. Don't forget Yahweh, because Yahweh is not, you know, in the third heavens, completely cut off from His people. He knows what we're going through. He knows what we're suffering. He knows why we're suffering it. And it's up to us to allow Yahweh to complete this perfect work within each and every one of us. And that suffering is part of the completion of that work. Like it or not. Believe it or not. I'm sure everyone in here believes it, though. Okay, so it continues. It says, beware that you do not forget Yahweh your Father by not keeping His laws, His judgments, His statutes, which I am giving you this day. Okay? If you would go over to page 153. Page 726. Okay, that's the book of Malachi. Page 726. We're going to see further what Yahweh wants us to remember. Okay? 726. Along with all the different things that he does for us, so that we would have these things in our minds. Me personally, the crystal, the purple crystal, and how it was found, the articles came out after the feast. I mean, that's locked in my mind, and Yahweh willing, I want to keep that in my mind. I'm going to find a special place in my book of Yahweh to put these articles in, because Yahweh is forever verifying and reconstituting the words of Yisrayl Hawkins. His actions, the things that he does, the things that he implements in the house of Yahweh, Yahweh is continually backing him up. But we have to reverence Yahweh in order to be able to see that he is uplifting his witness. Okay, so Malachi 3 and verse 6, it says, "For I am Yahweh, I change not. For I am Yahweh, I change not. Therefore, you sons of Jacob are not consumed." Remember, we know in the scriptures it says that if Yahweh didn't leave a remnant, all of us would be just like Sodom and Gomorrah. All of us. Sodom and Gomorrah is not only the practice of, or the religion, the Sodomite religion is not only about illicit acts. It's also about tattooing the body. It's also about committing fornication and adultery. It's also about stealing, robbing, gossip, hatred, envy, strife. All of those things are all compiled in the Sodomite religion. Okay? And he said that we would have been consumed. "For I am Yahweh, I change not. Therefore, you sons of Jacob are not consumed." Okay, therefore, the house of Yahweh, especially in these last days, has been promised to not go out. We are not consumed. If you would, go over to the book of Hebrews. Okay, Hebrews, this is on page 952. Because he is Yahweh, he changes not. Okay, so it's chapter 13. We're going to start in verse 8. Remember what we just read. I am Yahweh, I change not. Hebrews 13, verse 8 and 9. "The ordained salvation of Yahweh, the same yesterday and today and forever. Do not be carried away by different kinds of strange doctrine. For it is righteous that the heart be made steadfast by gratitude." Okay? So when we stub our toe, thank you, Yahweh. When we have our toothaches, headaches, backaches, thank you, Yahweh. Because Yahweh's completing this work. That shows that Yahweh's completing his work in each and every one of us. If we didn't have any, imagine how we would be if we didn't have anything to overcome. We would forget Yahweh. Yahweh said that in the scriptures. He said, after you have partaken in your food and eaten of the land and partaken in the fat of the lamb, do not forget me. Do not allow your heart to become fat. Okay? Yes, some of us may be able to do certain things and are well pleased in having that ability to do particular things, but we have to understand, we know that it comes from Father Yahweh. It says, okay, so it says, "For it is righteous that the heart be made steadfast by gratitude," by thankfulness, okay? "Not by instruction from which no benefit is received on how to live." Because we remember the way of Yahweh, the scriptures, is beneficial for doctrine, in guiding and directing the people of Yahweh into the only one true way of living, okay? So be thankful. Be thankful to Father Yahweh. Give him all honor and praise when we're suffering, because he's completing this work. Give Yahweh all honor and glory and praise when you see that, the witness has instituted something, and then Yahweh backs it up right afterwards. I remember when Yahshua Messiah said, when you see the Son of Man lifted up, will you be offended? And the same question has to come to each and every one of us. And that offense is forgetting. Okay, that offense is choosing to ignore, or choosing to do away with. When you see Yisrayl Hawkins lifted up, will we be offended? That's that strategic pause right there. Give you an opportunity to think about that. Check your heart. Okay? When we see Yisrayl Hawkins lifted up, will we be offended? I know initially everybody, no, I love Yisrayl Hawkins. No, I love the house of Yahweh. I love my brothers. What about when your brother steps on your toe? You know, when your brother steps on your toe, that's part of that suffering that you need to be thankful for. And show that gratitude, that steadfastness. Okay, let's go over to page 727. This is the book of Malachi again. 727, Malachi 4, verses 4 to 5. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the pace a little bit. But it says, remember the law of Moshe my servant, which I commanded through him at Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and the judgments. Behold, I will send Eliah, the laws and the prophets, which is the strength of Yahweh, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of Yahweh. Okay? I believe the King James Version says, the great and terrible day of Yahweh. Okay, but let's continue in verse 6. It says, and it will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, the hearts of the children to the fathers, before I come and strike the earth with a curse. Okay, that great and dreadful day is going to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers. Well, why? How? It's through the gratitude, through the thankfulness of being, it's a law to be thankful to Father Yahweh. If we're thankful to Father Yahweh, we'll do our best in everything that we put our hands to do within the house of Yahweh in true servitude to Yahweh's people. Okay, that shows true thankfulness to Father Yahweh. Now, of course, Yisrayl Hawkins is the one that Yahweh is sent to foretell. And just a reminder, let's go over to Isaiah 44. The book of Isaiah, where Yahweh spells it out plainly. Okay, in verse 1 it says, yet now hear, O Yaakov, my servant, and Yisrael, whom I have chosen. This is who he's speaking to. Okay, these are the ones whom Yahweh is speaking to. And then go to verse 7. Well, let's go to verse 6. It says, this is what Yahweh says. Okay, this is what Yahweh, the King of Israel, the Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts, says. I am the first and the last, and except me there is no source of power. 7. And who as I will foretell and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people, and the things which are coming and will come, let them foretell them. Do not fear, nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time, and have declared, you are my witnesses? Is there a source of power except me? Truly, there is no other rock, I know not one. There is no other source of power. Yahweh is our healer. And that's why we offer supplication and thanks and glory and gratitude to Father Yahweh, because He is the one who's able to save. Okay? When we go through our various trials, our suffering, the anxiety that we place upon ourselves, you know, being upset at our brother, being mad at our sister, holding on to grudges, that's part of forsaking Yahweh and forgetting Yahweh. That's actually part of showing the hatred as opposed to showing the love of Yahweh in gratitude, being thankful to Father Yahweh. There's no one who has ever been able to perform any work with all their heart, soul, and might with hatred in their heart. It doesn't work. I mean, it's just like gravity. Gravity pulls you to the earth. Hatred pulls you away from Yahweh. I mean, it's just simple. I mean, there's no way for us to really turn it around. You can't turn that around. You can't show hatred and love Yahweh. You can't show hatred to your brother or your sister and love Yahweh. It's impossible. It just does not work like that. Okay? The hatred that we need to get out of our minds is first and foremost beginning with opposing Yahweh in your brother, opposing Yahweh in your sister. Any opposition to Yahweh is hatred and will separate us from Father Yahweh. But Yahweh has given us many, 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 many things to rejoice and be reminded of him. You know, so rejoice in the fact that Yahweh has given us the purple, the royal purple, that we would look and we would see this color of purple and remember what we are. We are royalty before Father Yahweh. And Yahweh has given us an A in his class already. It's just up to us to maintain that A grade and become the chaste and perfect virgins that he wants us to be. So praise Yahweh. That brings me to the end of my sermonette. If you'd all please stand. I'd like to present to you a great servant in Yahweh's house, the great white buffalo.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today I'm going to be talking about, my topic is a scripture. I'm going to be talking about Matthew 5, verse 10. On page 731, it says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of Yahweh." Now the prophets, Yeshua, and pastor were persecuted, and since they were persecuted for righteousness' sake, they will inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. Yeshua was persecuted, and if you would turn to Matthew 27, verse 27 through 31 on page 757. It says, "The mocking of Yeshua. Then the soldiers of the governor took Yeshua in the praetorium, and they gathered the whole battalion around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and when they had plaited a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and placed a reed in his right hand. Then they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, 'Hail, King of the Yadaim.' Then they spat on him, took the reed, and struck him on the head. After they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put his clothes on him, and led him away to be nailed to a stake." And pastor was persecuted also. If you turn over to Isaiah 43, verse 28 on page 558, it says, "Therefore I will dissolve the Levitical priesthood, and will give Jacob over to the curse, and Israel to reproaches." And that reproaches that it's talking about there is the persecution, the bullying. If you would please play video 1.
And all of you, I think all of you know how the Catholic Church brought down the news media against the House of Yahweh and tried to belittle the house.
Say again? Want to say anything? Can you excuse us? I love the work. Watch your steps. Watch your steps. You're going to fall. Get hurt. I love the work of Yahweh. I know what I'm saying, and that's the name, but. What a beautiful sight.
With the judge's decision today, we believe that the bonds that were previously set were clearly ridiculous and unreasonable. The district court judge, after hearing evidence today, made a decision that we're delighted with. We think he's right, and the bonds were reduced to $25,000 each, a total of $100,000. Of course, the justice of the peace who testified said a normal bond in a second-degree felony is $4,000 to $5,000. And so I wondered, as he testified, why he had set bonds at $10 million in this case. As you probably noticed upstairs, I was talking to a bondsman upstairs. I expect that we'll have him bonded out this afternoon.
So you can see there that pastor was persecuted, and that was only part of it. They continually spread rumors about him all over the news. If you would turn over to page 408 in your book of Yahweh. Hadassah 6, verse 1 through 10. It says, "That night the king was unable to sleep, so he gave orders to bring the record book of the chronicles of the king's reign, and they were read in the king's presence. And it was found recorded there that Mordecai had given information about Bigthan and Teresh, exposing the plot of the doorkeepers to assassinate King Xerxes. Then the king asked, 'What honor and recognition has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this?' The king's officials who attended him replied, 'Nothing has been done for him.' The king asked, 'Who is in the court?' Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's living quarters to request that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's attendant said to him, 'Haman is standing in the court waiting there.' The king replied, 'Let him enter.' So Haman came in, and the king asked him, 'What should be done for the man whom the king especially desires to honor?' Then Haman thought to himself, 'Who would the king want to honor more than me?' So he answered the king and said, 'For the man the king especially desires to honor, let a royal robe which the king has worn be brought out, with a horse on which the king has ridden, and a crown of the kingdom which sits on the king's head. Then let this apparel and horse be delivered to one of the king's most worthy nobles, and have him array the man whom the king especially desires to honor. Then have the worthy noble lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, "This is what is done for the man whom the king especially desires to honor." Then the king commanded Haman, "Go at once, take the apparel and the horse, just as you have advised, to Mordecai, the Yadai, who sits at the king's gate. Do not leave out a single detail of all that you have suggested." So, this is what will be done for the man whom Yahweh desires to honor. He will sit in the kingdom with Yahweh and Yahshua. And when these tests and trials and this persecution occurs, it's like a mountain. And each test and trial, each persecution, if we pass it, we go forward 5 steps. If we fail it, we go backwards 1 step. And when we make it through all the persecution and all the tests and all the trials, then we get to the kingdom of Yahweh. And if we want to earn this position, we have to also strive to be perfect. And that's why Yahweh is giving us the test and letting us be persecuted so we can become perfect. And if this beastly system wants to kill you, stay strong. I think all of you have seen this before. This is what we should do. We should not go out of our place. And do not run from them. And why Yahweh is giving us the test is to see if we will become perfect and sit the kingdom with Yahshua. And with that, I have the great privilege and honor to turn it over to the great Kahan, Ilya Hyler Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Everyone may be seated. Today in the news, we're going to have showing some of the things that's taking place in Ukraine. Ukraine claiming they're worried. And, of course, NATO also claiming that they're worried about Russia building up forces on the border of Ukraine. And NATO's ready to come in and, of course, assist in any way they can, the claims they're making. Also, Press TV reporting, listen carefully, because they make a comment that if NATO, Russia, and the United States are involved in a war in this generation, it will be a nuclear war. Then also we have some natural flavored water coming out of Wichita Falls. Be careful what natural flavorings are. It'll open your mind to a whole new meaning today. And also, Russia recently held nuclear war games to prepare its forces to what's to come. At this time, if we could go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Several articles to cover with you today, including a report that has one city in Texas taking some very drastic measures to get so-called drinking water. But first, we're going to look at the Russian troop buildup on the eastern border of Ukraine. Now, both the Ukrainian government and NATO are worried about the intent of the Russian troops massing on the other side of the eastern Ukrainian border. The Pentagon believes there to be about 20,000 Russian troops, while the Ukrainian government says that number is as high as 60,000 troops.
Like a
big difference.
Yeah, huge difference. Now, NATO's top military commander, General Philip Breedlove, commented on the troop buildup during a recent forum in Brussels. He said, "There is absolutely sufficient force postured on the eastern border of Ukraine to run to Transnistria if the decision was made to do that. And that's very worrisome," he said. So it clearly, when we talk about threat in the military, we marry capability with intent. So, of course, what is Russia's intent there?
And the intent is what they're looking for.
Right.
Now, General Philip Breedlove is proposing that if Russian forces did come across Ukraine's eastern border, they may not stop at eastern Ukraine, but in fact they could cross the entire country to the Transnistrian region of Moldova, which is a region that wants to be part of Russia. Now, this would create a host of problems, as you can imagine, both politically and with the military if they're going to cross right through the country, about 700 kilometers.
Interesting. Now, Moscow's official position is that the forces are simply carrying out exercises. NATO, however, is not taking any chances and are beefing up their own troops in the region. During a Press TV interview, William Jones of the Executive Intelligence Review asked for his comments on NATO's troop buildup closer and closer to Russia.
And Mr. Jones, he said, it's very ominous. When you have that kind of buildup of military forces effectively on the border of Russia, this causes a reaction among the Russians. They have, over the period of the last 20 years, seen NATO getting closer and closer. And the games that have been played in Ukraine have been extremely dangerous.
No, that's one thing that's been a concern for Russia because NATO has been inching closer to its borders. Well, he continued, there is an attempt to pull together a political solution involving all parties, but at the same time, the U.S. has the sanctions already imposed on Russia for the Crimean debacle, and they are also threatening more sanctions, of course. So it's a dual policy, which isn't creating trust anywhere in the U.S., NATO, Crimea, anywhere.
That's right. Now, he also stated that blame is being put on Vladimir Putin for events taking place in Ukraine at this time. However, Mr. Jones went on to speculate that the parties on the Maidan and the parties occupying buildings in eastern Ukraine are not being controlled by anyone but themselves, and the resolution to this conflict will have to come from within the country, that NATO and Russia can both start drawing back to their corners.
I guess we'll see how it goes. When asked who will benefit from any sort of war between NATO and Russia, Jones made 2 points. First, he commented that there are those who, seeing we are in the worst financial crisis in history, feel they can take over what remains of the world's economy when war breaks out.
And secondly, and more importantly, he emphasized that for the world at large, a war today really is a nuclear war. Russia and the United States and NATO, these are nuclear powers. He continued, if a war starts even on a conventional or a skirmish level, this can quickly escalate to nuclear war, and then all humanity is at stake. So nobody benefits. But there are a lot of people who will push it anyhow, thinking that somehow they can win that war.
And of course, we've seen from history, Jeff, that there are no winners in war.
That's right.
None whatsoever. Now, as we've reported before, the drought has a death grip on the nation's southwestern states, including Texas. In fact, in one Texas border city, the drought is so bad that city officials are considering a solution that might not be too palatable for some. Since the current lake that supplies the city of Wichita Falls, Texas, is so low, city officials are planning on taking sewer water, yep, you heard me, sewer water, and turning it into tap water.
Wow. Well, since 2011, Wichita Falls has been experiencing exceptional drought, and times have called for desperate measures. Now, the plan is to take 5 million gallons of sewer water and recycle it back into the drinking supply, saving 5 million gallons from being drawn from the lake that currently supplies the city, which is called Lake Arrowhead, which is currently, Catan, only 27% full.
That is extremely low. Now, once the idea was considered, the wastewater had to be tested, and officials say it wouldn't take much to turn it into drinking water. All that was lacking was the pipeline connecting the wastewater plant to the water treatment plant. Well, that project has now been completed, and most residents are all for it, considering the other option that they say is on the table, which is running out of water. Currently, Wichita Falls is close to reaching level 5 drought restrictions, which means absolutely no unnecessary water usage at all, not even washing your car.
Now, it's not uncommon for cities to treat wastewater and then send it out to the streams and reservoirs, but this option that's on the table will put that treated water directly into the drinking water supply. There's an organization called the Water Reuse Association, which include utility companies, government officials, and researchers who are pushing hard for this to become common.
Now, cities in California, Florida, and North Carolina are considering using wastewater and putting it directly back into the drinking water, but Wichita Falls in Texas is the first city actually putting this into effect.
As we close out our broadcast today, Russia is carrying out military drills and say they have nothing to do with Ukraine, but are designed to counter military. Now, two missiles were fired from strategic submarines and a third from a defense Cosmos drone in northern Russia. The Russian president has attended a summit that's designed to finding ways to override massive nuclear missile attacks.
Well, thousands of years ago, water was turned into wine. Now mankind is doing the opposite, turning, yes, poopy water into drinking water. Although I don't think it's going to have the same beneficial effect. One would think the nuclear burning coming from the wars that are on the horizon is just what we need to cleanse this mess from what we've created for ourselves. Well, Yisrayl Hawkins of the House of Yahweh has been preaching that mankind is bringing destruction and defilement on this earth, and their wars will burn off the defilement from the earth and the atmosphere. Find out more about what's the cause and the solution, the peaceful solution to all of mankind's problems. Yisrayl Hawkins has the key to your survival, and here's what you need to do.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abelin, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can email them at info@yahweh.com, and for any calls coming from outside the United States, please call the number on your screen.
Stay with us. Up next, the only man authorized to bring forth the pure living waters of life, Yisrayl Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for joining us.
At this time, if everyone would please stand, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan, Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone! Praise Yahweh! Let's give a big one for Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. I love you too. You may be seated. The things that this world is getting themselves into, it's horrible. I want to show you what we're doing. You might look if you have Facebook, you can get that off of Facebook. That they have the whole story there. The letter and everything was run with it. The news articles, Yisrayl Hawkins and Malik Obama meeting at spring conference on peace concerning the rebuilding of the temple and future unity between religions was a huge success. That was at the feast, you know, and the news articles, praise Yahweh, the news media there's something like 53,000 of them running that article right now, with that included, with one that's on Big Country Facebook. Big Country homepage. I'm sorry, I was saying it wrong. Big Country homepage. This was run. This is strange to carry this article, but viral news chart. I don't know why they would run this, but I think I do, maybe because of the past articles. But I'm thinking we're going to contact these people and get some more insight on it as to why they're running it in their magazine. But I'm thinking that's probably because of the global warming work that we have done. Another large world magazine, this was the one that ran the article, that contacted us to see if we could see if they could get permission to run our temple brochure. That CEO World magazine, it's in it. This is just a few of the ones. And then Intercooler News Agency in South Dakota is running it. The article, Yisrayl Hawkins says Pope Francis confessing falls on deaf ears. That's over 85,000 news medias have run that now. Yisrayl Hawkins says to beware of the slick Catholic Church writings that subtly deceive, and that's up to 80,000 now, and still going strong. We're doing our part, brethren. We haven't slowed down. The tap water. If you're going to take drinking water with you, to a picnic or something like that, you might ought to keep it hidden or something. If they find it, they could file on you for carrying too much cocaine with you. If you get it out of the tap. Cocaine in the tap water, in your fresh tap water. The cities are starting to recycle it, as was, of course, foretold in prophecy for this generation. For this generation. I wanted you to see all of this as another hunting the nightmare bacteria. And, of course, this is the bacteria that is, I don't know if it's now spreading on its own or if it's getting some help from the scientists. There's so many things that's mixed in with this big collaboration of the Catholic Church. You know, it sits on 7 hills of Rome, yes, but it reaches every lab, in the world and has part in it. It reaches every governing system. I was reading about some congressmen and some senators that wanted to push through now some special projects that they had a big backing on, and people were really behind these things, but it contradicted some. It would hurt some business coming to the Catholic Church, and this is so often the case when people are running for office. And, of course, the first thing they do, if they don't want that person in there, as Malachi Martin said, they use psychology. They don't tell outright lies, but they use psychology leading you to believe that this person did so-and-so. And sometimes they just outright lie about the people. They lied about Barack Obama. So many people lied about him. It was pitiful. Some of them went so far out on the limb it pretty much wrecked their own political careers. But is he really a citizen? That was one of the thoughts that they were trying to place in everyone's mind to keep people from voting for him. Well, of course, we knew he was going to be in office because of the hidden codes and showing that he would be elected. But the lies that is brought forth, as Malachi Martin said in the propaganda, against these people to run the country the way they want to run the country. Now listen to me. The Pope, the Vatican, that sits on 7 hills, you can't imagine how far-fetched this thing is. Yes, it sits on 7 hills, but they have thousands and thousands of active people in the United States. If a congressman, or you were running for congressman, say you wanted to run for an office or a senator, and you had a backing of so many people saying, we want you to do this, we want you to do this, and you to do this, and you to do this. And they're voting you in. So you got this huge people running for you, and all of a sudden, here comes a priestly dressed Catholic into your office and said, I've got 52,000 Catholics right now that tells you they don't want this. Now, here you're stuck between backing up the people that have been financing you to get to that office and the Pope telling you, because this is coming from the Vatican, it's a control, leader of the kings of the earth. So it's the control they have over this. What we're seeing here with this water situation, the food situation, of course, I think they know that the atmosphere is screwed up, and they've screwed it up, and they know what they've done to, but they don't know what to do now because they'd have to repent of sin and tell the people to stop sinning in order to turn this thing around. It's it's gone too far, and it's going to get worse yet. This is just the beginning of what we see in Revelations and also the book of Matthew and also all the prophets. We're seeing sickness and disease, and not just sickness and disease. It's the worst ever. And I've told you this over and over and over. It's the worst ever. But it's not just happening by accident. It's being caused by the leader of the kings of the earth. And the reason I say that now, how do they get involved in sickness and disease? Well, pharmaceuticals. That's more precious than oil to them. A precious commodity that never ends, and of course the money that they drain from the government, wanting them to back researchers in trying to find a cure that maybe they already have. I mean, they created the disease so they know what to do to stop it. But these things are not taking place by accident. If you remember. One of the doctors from Washington, Dr. Hayes, he brought a sermon back when we were still on that stage over there. He said there's some 3,000 forms of flu. 3,000 forms of flu. Now, he said they pick three that they make vaccines for, 3 forms. Now, aren't they just brilliant, he says, to know which 3 to pick out of 3,000? That's pretty great odds, right, against finding the one that's going to come forth this year without knowing which one is going to come forth this year. And the only way they could know, he said, which one is going to come forth is they're going to send it. So he said there's a lot more behind this flu vaccines. There's billions of dollars in it, of course. The Roman Catholic Church, there's no way of counting their wealth. In one pocket they got like $180 billion. Another pocket they got 80 billion, but it's in the billions, and they say there's just no way to count it. They could, the government, if they went in to investigate their finances, there'd be 40 years in doing so, and they'd be getting behind. I'm sincere about this when I say that right there is coming from the Vatican. This world was not meant to be sick. And of course, the way that Yahweh created it for mankind and told Adam to guard and keep, it was healthy, very healthy. And even after they started bringing in sin, it took a while for the sin to start having effect, but it did, and it cut the lifespan down from about 15 to 1,500 years to 1,700 years, brought it down to what we see today. And, of course, a person is blessed if he gets by 50. Most of my friends died, in the 50s, in their age 50s, a lot of them. And there's a few that live behind closed doors with, like almost living in a balloon, that they bring to go like 100 or so, and they're so pleased with that. I won't be pleased until it's forever. And Alzheimer's diagnosed every 70 seconds now. Now, I don't know if you know what this is, but it's a disease, of course, like mad cow disease, and that, of course, it sets up homestead in the brain and in your nervous system, and you start doing crazy things. And every 70 seconds now, in today's world, every 70 seconds, someone is being diagnosed with it. Something else now, they try to push these things off, onto making you think that they're caused by something they're not. Don't believe it. Believe me. Believe the Scriptures. The Scriptures tells you what's causing this stuff, and they tell you who's the leaders of this stuff. And the fact that they're filling their pockets full of money and it's all floating back to the Vatican, the big profits are floating back to the Vatican, that's pretty much shows you who's in charge of it. Yesterday, I almost laughed. I thought, what an idiot it would take to believe this when they found 20 fat women and they all had breast cancer. So they assumed, and they put this out to the public, that obesity causes breast cancer. And I thought surely nobody would believe that, but they told it as if they were sincere, so I'm sure they did. Well, what about the 20 skinny women that's got breast cancer? Oh, we weren't trying to. We're just testing the fat ones. Some of the stupidest stuff that they're pulling over the eyes of the people, but they're selling, they put these out so in order to make money. They didn't put it out there to tell you need to lose weight so you won't have cancer. This wasn't their idea. Education wasn't their idea. It's to educate you and where you're supposed to go. Run to the doctor and get a mammogram. Or something. Let them sell you something. It'll only cost you $100 or $150, That's the first part of it. Before you die, they can get everything you got. Well, this is the leader of the kings of the earth that's bringing forth this evil world that we're living in right now. And it's not going to stop until Yahweh says until, and He gives you until. And of course, that's what we're basing our hopes on, 100%. We know that's, and in fact, Yahweh even shows where He would interfere. He actually gives the year. I should be able to bring that out if I don't miss any more services, bring that out by about Pentecost. First case of MERS virus confirmed in U.S. It's a respiratory, a bug that gets in your respiratory system and starts eating at it. Incurable, of course, right now. Now, I know of no better way. We're going to see the earth depopulated. The sickness and disease is not wiping people out fast enough. So, what is planned, as Malachi Martin brought forth, you got to get this in your mind now. Malachi Martin showed the plans of the Catholic Church. And he said that Mary is going to make war with all of those who will not accept her. Now, this still includes a lot of people in the world. The reason that the temple was destroyed was the fact that they had people in Israel reading and studying the Scriptures. And they were multiplying. And they couldn't put this wonderful knowledge down. The Catholic Church couldn't. They were known as Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians at that time. They rose up and made themselves openly rebellious in the days of Samuel. And then in 70 CE, they decided that they couldn't manage it, so they decided to destroy the temple, move to Rome, and then start killing them off and confiscate the religious books, of course. They did that. And they had this great falling away. Now, this was the falling away that the prophets spoke of and the apostles spoke of in the Scriptures. It was a forced falling away, of course, that Daniel spoke of. He said they would fight against Yahweh's people. At that time, even though the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians had control of the temple, they didn't have control of the people. And the people, they didn't want to bring their tithe anymore to the temple because they knew the evil men that were running that temple. And Yochanan goes up to one of the leaders, or at least his preaching said publicly that you shouldn't marry your brother's wife. Now, of course, this is adultery. Now, this is the state of affairs that the people were living in at that time when their king, one of their kings, they had many scattered all over Israel that fought the battles for them. And Yochanan in his preaching says, here's a great example right here. So he had one of their leaders. He was one of the leaders. The Herodians were leaders. They weren't religious people. They didn't give a flip whether the Sabbath was kept or not. The Pharisees separated themselves because they didn't want to expose their sodomy, and they knew that the sodomy was looked down on big time. So they separated themselves and went behind closed doors. The Sadducees was sad about it, of course, but could do nothing about it. The Essenes, they had tried to hold both hands or all three hands, in order to be apart and collect the money. And wealth was what they had it set up to control, and that they did. But the wealth was getting less all the time. And, of course, by this time they had built themselves a huge army, so they destroyed the temple and moved all the artifacts to Rome, and then they started governing by force and brought about this religion called Christianity. For anyone that is not familiar with this history, feel free to write, call, or email, and we'll get it to you absolutely free. You could find it yourself in history books. It might take you a while, but we have the books. We'll send you copies. You can go check them out if your library has them. But they moved this thing to Rome, and the force they'd go out and they'd take these villages where the men would organize themselves, and they'll say, well, we can live here in secret. Well, they could only live in secret for a while until the Roman soldiers, their spies, that they kept going continually. And at that time, they were far-reached even at that time. They had many spies in many places, eyes, full of eyes, not like they have today. But they had spies everywhere. So when they would find a village that was living peacefully, they would talk to these people. They'd tell them, you come and join us, and we'll educate your children. We have schools, we have hospitals, and so forth. If they didn't want to do this, if they didn't want to join or have any part to do with their schools and churches and so forth, then they would go back, send their army back later, and they would take them captive by force. And that meant killing off whatever strength they had, taking the rest to Babylon, training them there in the schools. The best of the best was taken on to Rome. This went on for years. This is shown in Daniel, even in Daniel's day. He was part of it. But this way they built up what we see today sitting on the 7 hills of Rome, the Vatican. And the Pope can run around kissing babies, and that's a picture of the Catholic Church that you get. You're not getting the full picture of the Vatican here with the Pope. The full picture of the Vatican is the pharmaceuticals, the ships that carry them, the planes that carry them, the bombs, the guided missiles. All of these things are controlled by the leader of the kings of the earth. Now, they're having trouble, of course, and they're trying to set up, each time they start having trouble in a certain field, and it's not going their way, they make long-term plans. Malachi Martin brought his message out, you know, 20 years ago. I remember bringing it at least that far back, and their plans for the quartet. And of course, he said, you know, they had it planned with these nations, the quartet. They had it planned with them, and they said, he was saying the only thing that could go wrong, you know, is like Russia would say, no, I'm not going to let you pull this one right here, this sneaky one, because you could take over our land. So she could rise up, Malachi Martin said, and he said she's a teddy bear right now, so they can maneuver her however they want to maneuver her. She had taken down the Iron Curtain, and then you know, just give them anything they want. But then Russia started seeing that they were lying to her. So the leaders started bringing this out and saying, you signed this treaty. Why aren't you sticking with this treaty? Well, of course, the UN would vote them down each time or ignore them. And the UN is the one that's got all the nations together saying you've got to do it this way. Well, who's running the UN? I'll bring you that information next week, Yahweh willing. But it's simple. Who's running the UN? Who's running everything? The Great Eight is no longer the Great Eight. It's the Great Seven now because they've kicked Russia out. Just like Malachi Martin said, this could go wrong. See, this could go wrong. But they had it set up to where they would have this war. The planned war is actually given to us in the 6th chapter of Revelations. It's actually planned out. Malachi Martin had the plans and put it in the book, The Keys of This Blood. The only thing I like about this is keys of this blood that Malachi Martin never did bring out. I kept thinking he would bring out, you know, this keys of the blood ends in a certain spot. prophecy shows that it's no longer by blood. And Yahshua was the first of the ending of that keys of this blood. Well, and of course, what takes over now is exactly what Yahshua lived, and that is righteousness. The keys of this righteousness. That's my next book, by the way, Keys of This Righteousness. I hope to get it written before the Catholic Church kills itself and out to them. But he knew, Malachi Martin knew that, of course, that the keys of this blood started back in the days of Moshe. Now, and it was given to Moshe, and it was a priesthood, of course, that Hebrews talks about and shows you that it ended with Yahshua and that the priests were set up. They had the keys of this blood. They were taken. They were men who, because of their bloodline, their genealogies, which they said that wasn't even, correct, because people would go to extremes to falsify their genealogy if they had the money to do so, like the Herodians. The Herodians, if they wanted to be listed in the priesthood, well, they would pay to have their names put there. So they got to finding out, hey, this is a discrepancy. This man shouldn't be here, So, but who dared to say, here's a man holding a sword here, and you're telling him he's wrong? That's like Yochanan saying to Herod, it's not right that you should have your brother's wife. And what they do? The sword. By this you will conquer. And they cut off his head. Well, that was their way of winning their battles. But of course they couldn't kill off everybody because they wanted their tithe payers, So they had they were between a rock and a hard place. That's where it came to. But they finally got to the fact where they could take the scriptures away from the people. And this is what they did. And this is the falling away. They actually forced the scriptures to be removed, the prophets' writings, the apostles' writings. They couldn't change them completely. They wanted to change them completely, but there's too many copies, and they was too scattered out for them to do so. And the way they knew that a copy was correct was there would be several others made of this one. These were all handwritten, but there were several others made of this one. So if this one over here, that the people, the gang, the settlement that made it, if it agreed with this one, several more settlements agreed with this one, we know this one is right. So the Catholic Church, in changing it, and the Vatican, when it was involved, they knew they could be proven wrong. So they had to take the scripture and they had to twist it and falsify it. And Daniel spoke of it in Daniel 7 when he said, this Roman Catholic Church with its army, the army will stand on its part, and they will take away the daily, that was the daily reading of the law, by the way, set up under Moshe. It had to be read every day in the house of Yahweh. So in order to remove that, they had to remove the scriptures totally, and which they did. And they kept them removed for 1,500 years. Now this was the Vatican's doing. They admit to it, and when they finally, after they lost their power from plagues that killed off their cardinals and weakened the church significantly, deadly wound is a very deadly wound. It talks about being healed later. But it lessened the power of the Catholic Church, but they still they kept control. And if you notice in the history of your Bible, if you ever read the history of your Bible, if you'll pay attention, the Pope still had to authorize this. Anything that was in print, and if they caught anyone putting out anything that wasn't authorized by the Vatican, then they had the sword there to cut off his head. This put a stop to him doing this anymore. So by this means now, they were able for 1,500 years to take the great wisdom of Yahweh away from the people. The great falling away. I'm jumping ahead of myself, but if you'll look over to 2 Thessalonians, and I'll just get this in your mind right now, but by Pentecost I should be able to get back to this and show you the great significance of that and the very first broadcast that myself and my brother made 52 years ago. 52 years ago. You'd never find it otherwise. If you didn't know what I know, you'd never find it. But it's hidden right here in this. Praise Yahweh. Well, Second Thessalonians, I'm jumping way ahead, but I want to get this in your mind. Now we plead with you, brothers, concerning the coming of our King Yahshua Messiah, and our gathering together unto him. The Apostle Shaul was actually speaking of this work right now, this house of Yahweh, the last days house of Yahweh. And he knew the house of Yahweh was going to be established. He knew that there's going to come a great falling away from righteousness. Total falling away from righteousness. And he puts that in this chapter right here. The great falling away first. Well, this was something they had to look forward to because they were Yahshua said, I'm going to send you out like sheep and they're going to kill you. And they did. They slaughtered them by, some historians say trillions. They slaughtered them by trillions. What got the most attention was Hitler. When they said he killed 6 million Jews. Well, he actually killed 6 million Sabbath keepers. And, of course, Hitler was not a Sabbath keeper, and most of his crew were Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians. And, of course, they were doing the work of the Catholic Church. And Hitler plainly says that. If you've ever gone to the Holocaust Museum, like they have one in Washington that I went through, Hitler plainly says that he was doing the bidding of the Catholic Church. He was killing off Sabbath keepers or a person who owned a menorah. Now, isn't that something, how they would hate that menorah that much? The 7-lamp lampstand? That causes questions. Anything like that causes questions. And if a person has something like that burning in his window, somebody's going to ask, what is that strange lamp that you got burning there? Well, this starts the rumors. Nora and her rumors going again. And of course, this is how the word spread. Well, I always knew something was wrong, the man would say, because I remember some things that was taught to me by my father or my uncle or something. And so I knew that there was something wrong. And I see the evil in this organization today. This was easy to see. They're killing off people by the thousand. The Inquisitions was horrible. Same thing took place here in America when Columbus came here and they started they brought their armies and started killing off what they called American Indians. They were killing off people who didn't want anything to do with their schools. There's killing off people who use the name Yah. It's in their songs, in their speeches, and so forth. There was a lot of teaching going on. And of course, they found not only that, they found menorahs, 7 lampstands carved out inside caves. I believe there's one in Colorado Springs, one of the more famous ones. In Colorado Springs, they actually have Indian. They tried to tried to put this back. I think it's a showpiece now, a tourist attraction. But anyway, they have signs of it here and there. The Apostle Shaul now is speaking of a gathering together to Yahshua. And he knew, as Yahshua said, when his coming was going to be, he was one of the ones that was shown this by the apostles. It's shown, Yahshua showed it in Matthew 24. And he said it'd be the last generation. Well, the apostles knew these scriptures. And these scriptures were broadcast not by radio or television like we do today or internet, but they were broadcast from person to person. The Noahs went around talking about these things. And of course, this brought questions about the Catholic Church. Well, how did they get here? Well, somebody said they was raised by a she-wolf. Well, they didn't want, they're very secretive. They didn't want and still don't want you to know how they got to the 7 hills of Rome and why. Look at the history of that. Of course, we know, and we're broadcasting it to the world. And Yahweh said, He said, nothing will be withheld with them. It'll be given into His hand. Yahweh said that. All of this is going to be given into His hand to do this until. And then He tells you about 2 people that's going to be in that future day preaching. Yes. Praise Yahweh. Well, the Apostle Shaul now was speaking of this when he says, concerning the coming of the King, Yahshua Messiah, and our gathering together to Him. Well, right now, if you'd get it in your mind that this coming, what it actually means, it's not making a personal appearance, but it's coming. He has the power, like Yahweh right now, to where He can actually send inspiration. And of course, it is broadcast, I don't know how, maybe like something like a signal from a radio. It's always a mystery to me how you can mash a button on a clicker, and it's got to be a certain, if you got 3 clickers and they're all set differently, you can't mash the wrong button. It doesn't help. You can mash 2 of them you got to get the right clicker and the right button, and then all of a sudden the gate opens. Well, Yahweh has His ways of reaching us, but before Yahshua, He spoke to us by the prophets. Now He's speaking. He's coming to us. Yahshua is speaking to us, as Hebrews, the very first chapter, shows you. Yahweh is coming, speaking to us through Yahshua, the high priest over the house of Yahweh, under inspiration, riding in the clouds, and so forth. And been doing a lot of that. We saw this week, someone called me and said there's a rainbow cloud over where the prophetic word broadcast is sent out. And so I quickly started looking. Of course, I'm not great at getting these pictures out of clouds. the first one I saw, I stared at it because it never did leave. It just sat there and wasn't moving. And I went in the office and worked for quite some time and came back out, and that cloud was still there. And I thought, oh, that is really strange. One cloud, and it's just sitting there. And somebody took a picture of it, and lo and behold, I didn't know till a month later I was looking at my own face sitting up there. But gathering together, we're gathering from Yahshua speaking to us. We're gathering people unto Him. And it's called the House of Yahweh. Now, Yahshua said, He said, I will establish my house on unity. I'm going to establish my house on unity. And He said, the gates of hell are not going to prevail any longer. They're not going to prevail against this one. They did against the other. And it was given into His hand. Are you getting this? It was given into His hand to do this, take all the scriptures away, and a great falling away took place. Falling away from righteousness. I'm speaking of righteousness. You got to know the law to know what righteousness is, right? Well, they had to take away the law. And that's what Daniel 7:25 tells you. You take away the law. Takes away the prophets, changes it. They take away the name Yahweh. Then they have the Bible saying, so God said, I will make man in my image. And God made man in His image. Well, no. You look down a little further, and Satan is saying, hey, do this evil, and you won't be like this God, you'll be like the gods. Which didn't make a lot of sense, you know, but no one ever really spent a lot of time worrying about it until the house of Yahweh was established. And then, of course, the book of Yahweh brought back. What a blessing this is. Yes, the book of Yahweh is back, and it's here to stay. The Catholic Church will not prevail against this house. You got to remember that. You've got to believe it. Verse 2, that you not be soon shaken in mind or troubled in spirit, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as if it was from us. You see all the sneaky things they were doing here to deceive the people back then. As that day of Yahweh is at hand, let no man deceive you. Now this shows you that the Apostle Shaul knew that this was for a future day. This was written in 52 ACE. ACE means, I use it a lot, but it means after the common era. You can call it AD. I think that means after death. You call it whatever you want to, but anyway, it was after Yeshua's death, after they murdered Yeshua. 52 years. That you may not be soon shaken, not even by letter from us. Let no man deceive you, verse 3, by any means, for that day will not come unless there comes a falling away first. Now at this time right here, when this was being written by the Apostle Shaul, being protected so he could write these things, he had to have time to write them, and he did. Yahweh made sure of it, because this had to be, this message right here is for us. It wasn't for them. It's for us today. He is writing about the last generation and the last gathering, and he was telling the brethren here that there's going to be this great falling away first. There comes the falling away first, and the servant of sin is revealed. Now, you talk about secrecy. The Pharisees, it means secrecy, separatist. They separated themselves so the people would not know that they married their brother's wives, that they was living in sodomy, that there's raping children, murdering children. This was going on then. It's the same religion that they have right now. They just moved it to another location where they could practice their religion behind closed doors. It's after they branched out into other places and the priests were not so careful that they got to getting caught and charges got to being filed against them. But nothing is done about it. If you notice, they file charges, but nothing is ever done. Nothing has ever changed. And the UN is now saying what you're doing to these children equals torture. So now the UN has got them charged with another law. And this brings about some more power that the UN can use. These are the ones that's rising up in opposition against the Catholic Church in the UN. So we got a struggle inside the UN. Malachi Martin knew this and talked about it, talked about the trouble inside that they were having, that the Catholic Church was having, because of the opposition that's rising up against them. Well, that's enough said on that. But he's going to be revealed. Well, who's going to reveal him? The one who opposes him is written plainly for everyone to see by the prophets. So the Apostle Shaul here is actually saying that this organization is actually going to be exposed. Remember, Yeshua said, if I hadn't have come and spoken to them, they would not have had their sins revealed. But now they have no cloak for their sins. Well, of course not. We are exposing them daily now. Yes. And of course, their sins, they're not repenting of sin. They may be repenting that they got caught for their evil, but they're not going to repent of sin. The gods that they're following, the evil gods that they're following. Satan says, do evil and you'll be like the gods. You won't be like Yahweh. You can't receive eternal life, but you have an eternal soul. Don't worry about it. Let me worry about that. Yeah. Then she tells her preachers, go out and tell them, just believe. Let me worry about the rest of it. That's Satan. Satan is not worried about your welfare. She's not worried about the world's welfare. The only thing she wants to do is get you destroyed by sickness, disease, by war, by famine, which is already in the works right now. But notice he's going to be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called gods. It's strange that he would have put it that way. He's above all the gods now. This last pope is above all the gods. So he's going to make the rules. He said, it was Benedict that said, it looks like all the gods have fallen asleep. And so they won't answer his prayers. Well, Pope Francis, he's going to change all that. He's going to put himself above all that is called gods, and he's going to clean up the Catholic Church. And the UN said, but Pope, the part that you're working on only has 1,000 people. What about all these billions of people out here that are raping these children? What are you doing there? He has no answers. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you.